And we are the coalition, again, continue our coverage of the Equity Council, what I guess I'll informally call the COVID-19 Equity Council meetings that are taking place here in sort of I guess it's an interesting format. Technically, this is not a government body, but it's a meeting, if you will, spearheaded by the Lieutenant Governor's Office and the current administration of dozens of community activists to talk about the inequities that exist in the urban core and actually across Rhode Island between the COVID response to the general population as opposed to what's happened in the inner cities. I'm standing here with someone who's very well known to the coalition, Dr. Daniel Munoz. He is a candidate to be the governor of the great state of Rhode Island, and he had a few choice words. We recorded this the session. We will be putting together this as a complete package, including the PowerPoint presentations that were a very important part of the presentation. But, I want to take this opportunity. Dr. Munoz, give us in a nutshell your concerns about what's happening with rental relief and utility relief.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. So as I previously described, we understand that Rhode Island Housing has chosen to select certain vendors and software solutions that have created challenges for people who have a difficult time navigating through the website, submitting the application process. We know that there are people that have submitted the documentation, even with the programs that the government has given grants to, the organizations, and still those organizations are running into challenges because the call center out in Utah is still hitting the denial button, right? Rhode Island Housing has set up a process that is filled with bureaucracy, and what organizations at the community level, like Direct Action for Rights and Equality, like George Wiley Center, like Representative Leonela Felix, myself, Delio Rodriguez, and the Providence Schools have done over the last week is come together and in some ways in parallel do clinics that would help support people through the application process. In Pawtucket and in Providence at DARE, we called those clinics the eviction clinics. In Providence Schools over the weekend, Saturday, they called them rent relief clinics. The idea was simple: get community volunteers that understand the application process, give them a laptop or iPad or pad, sit them down on a table, and get as many people through the applications as possible. Here's what we learned. Over the weekend in Pawtucket at the George Wiley Center, people were in line crying because they had had challenges with the system and were desperate for help, and they didn't know where to go. And there was a George Wiley Center to help them. There was Representative Leonela Felix. The line was out the door in Pawtucket. On Saturday, we went to Direct Action for Rights and Equality. We set up with the Center for Justice, a few Rhode Island Housing staff, as well as the community organization DARE and volunteers to support the community. It was a very different experience in DARE because DARE didn't have the outreach capacity, right, that other organizations had in terms of reaching out far wide throughout the community. So while we helped a lot of people, we ended up going down Broad Street and canvassing businesses. What we found is there were over a dozen people in those businesses that wanted to go to the clinic, but they were working, right? So how are we communicating with communities that have 1-2 jobs, that are unable to take time to go to a clinic? And are we setting up these clinics with enough frequency to give those individuals an opportunity to apply? But it didn't end there. We went down to PCTA, Providence Career and Technical Academy, where Delio Rodriguez Monsoan had set up a clinic in collaboration with Providence Schools and Rhode Island Housing. The amazing thing about Providence Schools is they reached out to the families of the students. What we saw in one school, and there were 3 clinics in 3 different Providence schools that day, we saw hundreds of people waiting in line. Hundreds were turned away that day. We had a total of 9 Rhode Island Housing staff, about 3 to 4 per each of the schools, and 3 at PCTA in particular that were helping. We had 50 volunteers, unpaid, uncompensated community volunteers. Even then, hundreds were turned away. It takes 30 minutes to an hour to complete the application process, even if you bring all the documentation. And we know that as a result of poor communication or just perhaps not having documentation, plenty of people are showing up with not all the documentation they need. But that's not the point. The point is we've given them one opportunity, which we had to turn them away from, and no one's talking about whether they're going to have another opportunity. No one's talking about whether this is going to be standardized, whether community-driven clinics in collaboration with Rhode Island Housing in the state will take place throughout not only this year, but into next year. So the question becomes, are we quantifying the actual need in communities? We're not.
Your reporter has been asking for 4 or 5 months now, a variety of members of their administration. And I wonder why, particularly since this is House money per se, it's federal money, and the money's there to be spent. And the needs, again, in both sides of the equation, both landlords, real estate investors, many of whom are local, many of whom are from the community itself, as well as tenants, are going home every night and they're trying to go to sleep, wondering whether A, if you're a tenant, you'll have a home tomorrow, or B, if you're a landlord, what's left of your credit rating will allow you to refinance, or are you going to be hit with a foreclosure in many cases? Why hasn't there been the call to arms to, again, there's House money there. Why hasn't there been a call to arms to deal with this crisis that we've known has been headed our way for a year and a half now?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think a lot of this comes down to consistently in the state of Rhode Island having leaders, having administrations that do not want to quantify a problem, because then they would have a responsibility to address the problem. And while we have money sitting in the bank, you have to point out that this situation with rent relief is very much aligned with the other social determinants of health and disparities that we've identified throughout COVID-19, including vaccination rates. So we've put a magnifying glass on a lot of the healthcare related issues, but to really point out the demand and the need in communities for rent relief is going to amplify, right, all of the other calls to action that we've been making. And so the question becomes, is there a desire to truly address the needs that have been identified and the calls to action that have been made? We've been talking about community-driven clinics since vaccinations. We've been talking about putting experts into the communities to talk about vaccine safety, and now to talk about the rent relief program. If we had been placing people in the community and having these clinics not only for legal consultation with the Center for Justice, application support by Rhode Island Housing, but also questions and answers, right, by leaders that understand the process, then perhaps homeowners would know that the homeowners program is about to open at some point in the next few months. They would know that service providers, banks are prepared for that program and are not going to be quick to push people into foreclosure, right? So there's a lot that's going on in the back end that Rhode Island Housing knows, but that information is not getting to communities. And the consequence is desperation, hopelessness. And when that happens, we're starting to see, in fact, a tension, a building between tenants and landlords, a lack of certainty as to whether people will have a home or have utilities, have heat in the winter. And so what do we do? What do we do beyond just supporting the application, but actually repairing the damage that we've already done for not deploying these funds sooner, for not providing community-driven rent relief clinics sooner?
Finally, you're running for governor. You've been on the front lines of this battle now, well before your announcement. Full disclosure, we know each other personally. We're friends, and we've seen each other at a few of the more than a few of the best protests and the best rallies in town. But on a serious note, let's just say you're elected governor. You take office tomorrow. Give us a quick and hit plan, if you will, of what you would do immediately to stem this crisis.
Yeah, I mean, look, as governor today, it's very clear to me, in speaking with Jennifer Wood at the Center for Justice, that there is flexibility in the law as it relates to the American Rescue Plan Act, right? It is about finding out where that flexibility is and then getting these funds where they need to go. So right now, I will say Rhode Island Housing is a quasi-organization. The state, it's not a kind of department within the state, but if they're not doing the job well, then we need to move the contract to an organization that will. We need to be involved in the decisions that are directly impacting our people here in Rhode Island. So if it's a technology decision, we at this point need to put our foot in to the door and say, hey, if you can't handle a decision and make the right decision to get a software system that's intuitive, that's 3 clicks away from an application submission, then we're going to do it. If you have a call center in Utah that doesn't know how to follow basic protocols and is hitting the denial button, then you need to release that business in Utah and find another one here locally, and someone that understands the dynamic and the communities that are being served. Or again, we will put our foot in the door and at best work with you, at worst end the contract altogether. The money we have, the first phase of the federal dollars, especially as it relates to rent relief, is at threat of getting clawed back by the end of next year, right? So we have a short time to spend millions of dollars. The second portion we have until 2025. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, but we need to create a foundation. And that goes across every system, every bit of work that I've been involved with in this state, from healthcare to now the eviction clinics, even when we talk about education systems. If we are not actively investing in organizations that do mutual aid work, and supporting not only their operations, but actually providing stipends for community volunteers that support those organizations, then we are ultimately not going to do enough to address the equity gaps that exist in our education, in our healthcare system, and in our housing systems.
Thank you very much, Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz, candidate for governor for the state of Rhode Island, and a member of the equity panel that met here today in the administration building. Folks, we'll see this out on the website tomorrow, hopefully with the multimedia presentation that accompanied today's meeting, as well as hopefully great video and audio. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.